Hi, I'm Laurie. I spent 5 years rebuilding my late father's Mustang, every bolt, every wire, every night alone in that garage. And then one morning over Sunday dinner, I overheard my own mother say, "Sell her car. She doesn't even have a family yet." They didn't say it to me. They didn't have to. The next day, the car was gone. Why would the people who raised me think I wouldn't notice something like that? Have you ever been treated like your boundaries didn't matter just because you're the single one? Let me know in the comments. It was Sunday, the kind of warm, flat afternoon that usually made me nostalgic for something that never quite existed. I was seated at my parents' dinner table in San Antonio, surrounded by the familiar clink of cutlery and chairs that always wobbled slightly on the tile. Marla, my mother, was slicing ham. Ed, my father, was pouring himself his second glass of red. Jenna, my older sister, was absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone like she'd already left the room. And then I heard it. "Sell her car. She doesn't even have a family yet." The words weren't aimed at me. They were delivered in that off-handed, dismissive tone my mother reserved for topics she considered already decided. She said it while arranging potato salad on the tray, like she was planning who'd take home leftovers. I didn't say a word. I kept chewing. My father didn't blink. He nodded once, the same way he used to when confirming dinner reservations or bills paid. Jenna didn't look up. Maybe she hadn't heard. Maybe she had. I excused myself to the bathroom, walked slowly, too afraid to trip over the emotions rising like bile. I locked the door and stared at my own face in the mirror. I whispered the sentence back to myself like I didn't believe it had really been said. Sell her car. She doesn't even have a family yet. I leaned forward, hands gripping the sink, and remembered another time. Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. My cousin had asked why I hadn't settled down yet. My mother laughed, said, "Laurie's always been independent. That's code for picky." Everyone else laughed too. They never saw me as permanent. Just something holding space until Jenna needed more room. When I got home that night, the garage felt different. Too still. I opened the door slowly and saw it. The 1970 Highland Green Mustang, the one I'd spent 5 years restoring with my father's tools, his old notepad full of sketches, his steady, calloused hands once over mine. The car wasn't finished just for the sake of finishing it. It was a translation of grief. It was how I kept speaking to him after he was gone. I ran my hand along the curved hood. It had been waxed 2 days ago. It felt like skin over muscle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I did stand there longer than I needed to, watching my fingers tremble. The next morning, my phone rang at exactly 8:15. It was Martin Reyes, an old neighbor who now volunteered at the same veterans charity as my dad. "Hey, Laurie," he said cheerfully. "Heard you finally sold the Mustang. Helping Jenna with her healing retreat, right? That's a beautiful thing. Just wanted to say you did the right thing." I didn't respond. My body went still. I could hear my own heartbeat in my teeth. Sold? I hadn't sold anything. The line buzzed. "You still there?" I hung up without saying a word and walked straight to the garage. And it was gone. The car, the hours, the grief, the conversations with someone who no longer breathed. My sanctuary, my proof that I could build something that lasted. Gone. I stood in the center of the empty space, the concrete still holding the memory of where the tires used to rest. The silence was loud, too loud. They sold it before I even had the chance to tell them no. The house was still, but not in a peaceful way. I was pouring hot water over coffee grounds like I did every morning, the smell filling the air, trying to bring some sort of normal back, but the garage was silent. No sound of metal shifting under its own weight. No soft click of cooling pipes. Just space, and the echo of something taken. I hadn't touched the coffee when the phone rang. "Laurie Van?" The voice on the other end was polite, professional. "Yes?" "This is Jennifer from San Antonio Title Services. Just confirming, did you authorize the title transfer for the 1970 Mustang ending in 3312? My throat closed. "I'm sorry. What?" "We processed it last week. Title now shows sole ownership under Edward Rowe. Just a courtesy call." I couldn't feel my hands. 12 days ago, my mother had walked into my home with a manila folder, smiling like she'd just made banana bread. "Quick favor," she'd said. "Some insurance paperwork, nothing serious." You know how your dad is about timing and forms? I was on my way to a Zoom call, distracted. She touched my arm gently, like she always did when she wanted something to feel safe. You're always so good about handling the boring stuff, she'd smiled. I'd signed. Now I sat at my kitchen table, replaying that scene in my head like a rerun I didn't ask for. The signature was mine. The pen was mine. The trust, though, whatever remained of it, was theirs. And they'd spent it. I drove to my father's office. He still worked part-time at the local Veterans Foundation, mostly pushing paper and shaking hands, the kind of job that came with plaques on the wall and stories he'd told too many times. He greeted me with that effortless composure only people who feel untouchable seem to possess. "Hey, kiddo," he said, motioning me in. "Something wrong? Who bought the car?" He blinked like I was asking about the weather. "Carl's boy. You remember Kyle? Paid in cash." "You sold it to Carl's son." "Yeah. Stand up, kid. Real polite." I nodded slowly. "There was an offer on the table last month. 35,000. You knew that." He shrugged. "Money's not everything. Carl's family is good people." I stood there, mouth open, trying to line up the numbers and logic. But there wasn't any. Just loyalty. Selective, curated, and never pointed in my direction. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just left. When I got home, I opened every drawer, every folder. I checked the bank account that still had my name and my father's, joint from years ago when we were still pretending we were one family unit. I checked the safe. My name was still on the deed to the house. The car? Gone. I opened a new account. I deleted shared permissions. I printed the page with my signature on it. I stared at the curve of my own pen stroke and thought about how betrayal didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it looked like your mother handing you a blue pen and saying, "Just this one last page." I put the form in a folder labeled Future Evidence. Then I made another call, this time to a lawyer. If they could forge my trust, I could rewrite the rules. The credit union lobby was cold in the way banks always are, artificial and quiet. I sat with my arms folded, watching a teenage couple whisper to each other in the next row. The girl had a blue binder labeled FAFSA, and the boy was Googling interest rates on his phone. I once had a plan too, I thought. It was never mine for long. I stared ahead, past the brochure rack and the security glass, into the fluorescent stillness, waiting for my number to be called. And somewhere between the silence and the waiting, the memory came back, unasked. 12 years ago, I got into graduate school. Full acceptance to a master's program in Austin. I'd printed the letter twice just to hold it in both hands. That night, I brought it to the dinner table. Jenna was there, still blonde then, still hopeful. Dad grunted with mild approval. Mom smiled and refilled the wine glasses. I unfolded the paper and slid it across the table. "I'm in," I said. Mom blinked slowly, cutting her roast chicken. "Oh, honey, about that. We had to help Jenna with her yoga healing certification. She's going through a very vulnerable time. We thought you'd understand." I didn't understand. I checked my account when they went to bed. My tuition savings, every dollar I'd put away since undergrad, was gone. Zero. Jenna came into my room that night in her bathrobe, smelling like lavender and peppermint oil. She hugged me, all warm breath and soft tone, and said, "It was meant to be. You don't really like academia anyway." She said it like it was kindness, like she'd done me a favor. I nodded back, the way a person nods when they're trying to remember where they left their ability to speak. But that wasn't even the first time. I was 19 when I first learned what trust costs. I had spent an entire summer working double shifts at the diner on West Blanco Road, saving up to buy a rusted-out Civic from a neighbor who was moving. I was so proud of that envelope of deposit cash, I held it like a living thing. My mom said we should open a joint account. "Just to be safe," she said. "It'll help build your credit." I agreed. Of course I agreed. A week before the car was mine, I checked the balance online. Zero. When I asked, Mom said, "It was for a family emergency, I forgot to tell you." Her voice was flat, like I'd inconvenienced her by asking. I asked what the emergency was. She never answered. The banker called my name. Back in the present, I stood, walked to the desk, and opened a brand new account in my name only. No joint access, no shared recovery emails, no secondary signers. They taught me early, I thought. Don't attach your name to anyone else's hands. I walked to my car. In the glove box was the same grad school acceptance letter I'd never thrown away. The ink had faded, but the words were still there. I folded it once, then again, and placed it in the folder marked banking. I didn't forget. I just stopped mentioning it. The backyard smelled like overripe watermelon and burnt veggie skewers. Jenna's new patio lights flickered weakly as dusk settled over her fresh start barbecue. Everyone was there, extended family, old neighbors, a coworker or two. I showed up on time with a baked artichoke dip, still warm, and set it near the chips. No one touched it. No one asked if I brought it. They were too busy clinking glasses and calling Jenna brave. To resilience, someone toasted. Jenna raised her drink and smiled like she was receiving a crown. I stood off to the side by the grill, nodding at jokes I couldn't hear, offering smiles that never made it to my eyes. Ed found me during dessert. He was holding a plastic cup of sangria and looking like he had something philosophical to say. That was always the warning sign. "You've got a good job," he started, not unkindly. "But you'll understand what life's really about once you have a child." I didn't flinch. "Maybe I won't," he frowned. "Then you're wasting the life we gave you." That one landed, somewhere between my collarbone and my stomach. I nodded once as if acknowledging a traffic signal and stepped away. Jenna's laughter rang behind me. Her voice was always just a little louder than the people around her, even when she whispered. Later, I found Marla near the lemonade jug, rearranging napkins like they were secrets. I asked gently, almost like it wasn't important, "Has Jenna ever paid back the money from last year? The $3,000 for her set trip?" Marla didn't look at me. "She lost a baby, Laurie. That pain doesn't just go away." That was her answer. That always was. It didn't matter how many lies Jenna told, how many promises she broke, how many debts she left behind like loose change. She was the one who bled once, and so she could never be wrong again. I drove home without saying goodbye. On the freeway, headlights passed me like I wasn't moving at all. I had the windows rolled down. The air smelled like cut grass and cheap gas. Somewhere, a song I used to love was playing on another station. I didn't reach to change the dial. When I got home, I went straight to the garage. The empty space glared at me under the single overhead bulb. I sat on the stool where I used to polish the Mustang. My hands instinctively reached for the polishing rag that wasn't there anymore. "It wasn't just that they didn't see me," I whispered. "It's that they saw me and decided I was already gone." That night, I wrote a note and taped it to my bathroom mirror. "Next time, leave earlier, before they say it out loud again." I ripped it up 5 minutes later and flushed the pieces down the toilet. But I remembered every word. The flyer was tucked beneath a pile of old utility bills and takeout menus. I hadn't seen it in almost a year. Vintage car show, Austin, last May. I'd registered the Mustang the moment I finished the final coat of paint. It was supposed to be our first public appearance. Me and her. Me and the version of my father who lived in the curve of that hood. I remembered the exact moment I told my dad. He was seated in the recliner, sipping coffee like it was the only thing worth tasting. I said, "I entered her in the show. That Mustang's finally ready." He didn't look up. "No one in this family needs to flaunt anything," he said, like it was a moral stance. I canceled my registration the next day. Now the flyer sat in my hands, creased but not torn, and I stared at it long enough to memorize the font. I slid it into my purse before I headed out for dinner that evening. My parents, Jenna, me, just the 4 of us. Dinner was meatloaf and overcooked peas. Ed carved like he was angry at the food. Marla kept the conversation afloat with updates about Jenna's wellness journal. No one asked about my day. I waited until Jenna was halfway through her second glass of wine before I said it. "Don't sell that car. Not ever. Not when I'm gone. Not when you think I'll say yes. Don't sell it." Silence. My mother gave me one of those tight smiles that always felt stitched on. My father didn't even blink. Jenna let out a snort. "Relax, Laurie. No one wants your rust bucket." I put my fork down. "I'm serious." Marla reached across the table to refill Jenna's glass. "You've always been too attached to things," she said. They heard me. They just decided it didn't count. I left before dessert. No explanations, no dramatic exits, just my purse, my keys, and a migraine blooming behind my eyes. That night, I sat at my desk and opened every document I had ever shared with them. Bank access, tax returns, account recovery emails. One by one, I revoked permissions. I created new passwords. I called a lawyer and booked the soonest appointment. The next morning, I drafted a letter of intent. Full asset separation, revocation of joint financial authority, a notice of independent ownership on the house. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I left it open on my desktop, ready. It wasn't war, but it wasn't peace either. Later that night, I walked to the fridge and stuck the car show flyer under a magnet. Right next to a grocery list I hadn't crossed off in weeks. They thought warning me wouldn't matter. Let's see how they handle being warned. I didn't even pour the coffee that morning. Just stood there in my kitchen, staring at the numbers on the screen. My balance, my history, my name. I moved like someone who had dropped a glass and knew exactly where the shards had landed. I wasn't careful out of fear. I was careful because this was the last time I'd ever need to be. I opened a second account. A different bank, different branch, different everything. I shut down the automatic transfers my parents never asked permission for. I removed their names from old permissions, utilities, savings, tax records. Click by click, I erased the footprints they had quietly left inside the walls of my life. There was no ceremony to it, no anger. Only the kind of stillness that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to realize they've gone too far. I met Noah Griggs for lunch at a place that served overly complicated salads and smoothies that cost more than gasoline. He'd been my friend in college. Pre-law, long-winded, always more interested in the why than the how. It was the right kind of safe. He looked over the draft I'd emailed him the night before. "Is this war?" he asked, quietly. "No," I said. "It's closure." He nodded, then pointed out a clause I should strengthen. We ordered another coffee. We didn't toast to anything. That night, I arrived at my parents' house for dinner. Just like always. Just like nothing had changed. The table was set, the meatloaf was overdone, and Jenna had a new essential oil she was raving about. No one asked how I was. No one mentioned the missing car, the bank accounts, or the silence that had grown between us like ivy. During dessert, I pulled an envelope from my bag and set it on the table. Ed raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" I met his eyes without blinking. "It's the last thing with my name that you'll be allowed to touch." He opened it. I didn't look away. Marla's voice cut in. "Laurie, don't be dramatic." I turned to her slowly. "I'm not being dramatic, I'm being final." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "I'm no longer the daughter who owes you for being born." The words landed like a cold knife. Precise, quiet, undeniable. I gathered my coat before they could respond. Out in the car, I sat with the engine off, letting the heat from the day slip away. The garage at home would be dark by now, the workbench waiting like an altar. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I whispered into the stillness. I did it. The Mustang was gone. The silence was not. It was a charity brunch hosted at the community center downtown, the kind with folding chairs, buffet tables, and too many name tags. Marla had organized it under the banner of Healing Through Connection, which made me laugh silently as I parked my car. She had invited the whole family, of course. I hadn't planned on going, but something inside me wanted to see how they'd react to me just showing up. I wore a navy blouse and flats, neutral, easy to walk away in. Inside, Ed was already shaking hands with his old friend Carl, the man whose son now owned my Mustang. I walked in just in time to hear Carl say loudly, "Laurie's car was cute, but definitely not worth what she thought it was." Laughter followed, the kind that starts slow and then catches in the group like fire through dry brush. I stood still, smiled the way someone smiles when they don't feel anything at all. Carl wasn't done. "Some women just get sentimental about metal, huh?" I looked at my father. He sipped his drink and said nothing. Marla chimed in, adjusting her bracelet. "She just needs time to let go. It's been a rough year." I excused myself to the restroom before I said something I couldn't unsay. In the mirror, the lights above buzzed faintly. My reflection stared back, tired but steady. I pressed a paper towel to my face, not because I was crying, there was nothing left to cry, but because I needed something to hold. They don't just hurt me, I thought. They want others to find it funny. I took a deep breath, walked back out, and sat at the table again. Not for them, for me, to see it through. At some point, Jenna spilled her drink. A full glass of lemonade tipped over her plate and pooled onto the tablecloth. I handed her a napkin without thinking. Marla reached out to pat Jenna's shoulder. She's still not over the baby. Give her space. I didn't say anything, but I flinched. It didn't matter how much time passed. That sentence was always waiting in the wings, like a curtain they could draw at any moment to block out everything else. Jenna's mistakes, their favoritism, the money, the silence, all forgiven because of what she had lost once. No one ever asked what I had lost. As the brunch wound down, people started gathering their bags, trading hugs. I slipped out quietly, walking to my car in the soft heat of mid-morning. Ed followed me halfway across the lot. "You didn't have to make it so cold today," he said, almost lightly. I paused at the driver's door. "It was warm enough when you were laughing." They called it a final talk, as if there had been talks before, as if there had been space for negotiation. I arrived on time. Jenna was already there, sitting in the corner of the living room like someone preparing for a staged reading. Her legs crossed, her eyes soft, her body language screaming, "See how calm I am, even now." Marla poured tea into mismatched cups, while Ed leaned back in his chair, pretending this wasn't an ambush dressed in polite linen. Marla cleared her throat and began, "I think we all got a little emotional lately." I didn't wait for the rest. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, thin but solid, and placed it on the coffee table between the coasters and the false good intentions. "These are not threats," I said. "These are receipts." Inside were the final bank statements, the notarized house deed transfer, a copy of the signature page I had been tricked into signing, a list of all shared accounts now closed. Ed stared at the papers as if they were written in another language. Marla looked at me like I had just slapped her without raising a hand. "The Mustang," I began, "was never about the car." Ed opened his mouth. I kept going. "You didn't sell it to help Jenna. You sold it because you knew I wouldn't fight you, and you wanted to be done with pretending I mattered." He closed his mouth. Jenna made a soft sound, barely louder than a breath. "You're cutting off your own blood." I turned to her slowly. "I'm bleeding out because you keep carving." She blinked hard, trying to summon tears. I didn't give her the room to perform. "You're not the only one who lost something," I said. "I just did it quietly." Ed shifted in his chair, his fingers pressing together like he was about to deliver a lesson. "This isn't about a car, Laurie." "You're right," I said. "It's about value. You taught me to only respect what I earn. I'm doing that now." I looked at Marla. Her mouth was pressed tight, the edges trembling with something she refused to name. "The last time you called me daughter was when you needed something signed." I slid one last paper across the table. Not legal, not official, just a note. "This is the last time I sign anything for you." No shouting, no slamming doors, just a room that had gone very, very still. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Jenna's voice, soft and brittle. "You'll regret this." I didn't turn around. "I already did. That's why it ends here." The garage was quieter than it had ever been. Not just empty, cleansed. I swept the floor slowly, even though it was already clean. Dust more symbolic than real. Each brush of the broom felt like writing a line I'd never speak aloud. The Mustang was gone. But the space it left behind wasn't hollow. It was breathing. Open. I paused at the old workbench and wiped off the corner where oil cans used to line up like soldiers. In their place, I set down a small framed photo, me and my dad, both in coveralls, both smiling like we hadn't yet learned how people grow apart. It was never just a car. It was the last place I still heard his voice. My phone buzzed. A voicemail. Jenna. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Hey, Mom's been quiet. I think she misses you. We all do. I mean, things went too far. I guess we didn't know how to stop. I didn't listen to the rest. I saved it. That was enough. I waited for too many messages that never came, I said aloud. That one had arrived too late, but not for nothing. 2 weeks later, I stood inside a different kind of garage. One painted in brighter tones, cleaner lines, windows that let in sunlight. A community workspace for women in trades. I had volunteered to guest speak, but ended up staying longer than I planned. A girl, maybe 16, approached me after I finished talking about vintage restorations. "You fixed up that green '70 Mustang, right?" she asked. I nodded, surprised. "You heard about that?" She grinned. "Everyone did." That night I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter I never intended to send. It was addressed to Marla. "I hope," I wrote, "you remember my name without needing a favor next to it." I folded the letter, slid it between pages of a worn leather journal, and closed the book without hesitation. Later, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea cooling in my hands. The sun was hitting the garage wall just right, casting the same kind of shadow the Mustang once did when I parked her at the perfect angle. I whispered to myself, I didn't lose the car. I gained a door. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with yelling or slammed doors. They come with silence, with documents you didn't read closely enough, with people you thought would always choose you, and didn't. I learned that boundaries aren't always announced with loud declarations. Sometimes they're built in the quiet, with one clear decision: enough. If you're watching this and you've ever been the strong one, the reliable one, the one expected to give without asking, this is your reminder. Your worth isn't measured by how much you endure. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose peace over performance. And no, you don't need to have a family to deserve respect. You need breath. And a name. That's all. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a family pattern that no longer served you? Or maybe you're still in it, trying to find your voice. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home, or tell me what city you're watching from. If you disagreed with something in the story, I'd love to hear that too. Let's talk. Let's grow. And hey, if you found even one sentence in this video that made you feel less alone, please subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming, and I'd love for you to be part of this space. You belong here. We all do.